So let's just get right into it, Gail.
Please.
So I want to start by kind of talking a little bit about your own upbringing, okay, and how you ended up learning about the issue of race and what that was like for you.
I have been reflecting upon this a lot as I age and my parents have passed. And this is what many of us elderly people do. And when I grew up, uh, I realized I learned everything I needed to know about being a good white American racist on my parents' loving knees. And so that uh, it wasn't so much hate as absolute ignorance and othering. I guess I come that, but it was done in a way that you had to. I've had to slowly unravel the love of the home from these just which was good from almost evil teachings. That's the only way I can describe them as evil. And I'll give you an example. Um, my grandmother, my father's mother, grew up in Harlem. When it was a middle class, she would have called it not middle class, petite bourgeois neighborhood, and would complain bitterly about how the neighborhood was destroyed by those Negroes. And her family had to move away. And no, so I was very curious about that because it made no sense the way she described it. But as a kid, you don't know. Um, but I had other clues. My father was a pediatrician, and he never said he believed in eugenics. I didn't know that word, but we were often told, I was the oldest of 7 children, and we were often told that people like him, people like us, needed to have lots of children because they weren't. And those other people, and those are the words they would use, those other people are having lots of children, and that's not good. I mean, just and so I was brought up being told basically I was a eugenics experiment. And then my father would go, because in those days doctors did do a lot of pro bono work, they didn't question it. And he would go to the projects in the city. He lived in a suburb of the 50s, one of these rural places that tripled in size every year in those days. And he would complain bitterly about how filthy the projects were. Now, I knew that no, everybody in the projects were Black. I knew that, or Negro, as we said then. I knew that. And he would talk about how there was feces in the hallways and how gross it was. But at the same time, a woman, I'm sorry, I don't understand how you're
It's
friends.
okay. It's
Yeah.
okay.
A woman who lived in the projects cleaned our house. Now, I was just a little kid, but this made no sense to me because if these people were so filthy, then why did they hire one of them to clean our house? And why did she do such a good job? In my household, and I don't know if you know this about white Yankees, but we're brought up to have no emotional intelligence whatsoever. No emotions are ever named. So I had no idea that when I was angry, I was angry. I had no word for it. If I was sad, I was sad. There was no words for any of that. And so we're supposed to be so smart, but there was this whole where what Viola would do, she played opera on the radio all day and she sang to it. And the emotions that were in that opera, which, I didn't understand any of the words, just touched me so much and made me really curious about how music could touch feelings. But it was so totally different than anything that was in the stereotypes around me. Is that this woman who opera was her favorite thing in the world, was Black, lived in the project, she was cleaning, could run our household beautifully, and they were supposed to be dirty, and it just none of it went together.
It's interesting to hear what you said about emotion. We're definitely going to wrap back around to that at some point because I think it is critical, even at the present moment when we're having this kind of racial reckoning. And in my conversations that I have with white people on race, I find that there's this whole narrative out there that emotion is not important, that it
Yeah,
is, that it is weakness if you
yeah,
acknowledge it. Um,
yeah.
and a lot of people, I feel like, kind of are overlooking that, but I find it to be central to the cause of racial justice. So we're going to come back to that.
Yeah, let's do that because I think that's a very I think I agree with you, and I think it's a motivating factor for white people to get involved because it is only to our benefit to learn a little emotional intelligence, and it's not easy work, and we need to do it. I mean, it's been nothing but better for me and my family for us to learn a little emotional intelligence. I moved to Providence, Rhode Island to go to art school. Providence, Rhode Island, at that time was one of the most corrupt cities in the United States of America. I did not know why it was so awful. I lived outside of the dorm within 6 months of being at school. So I lived in a neighborhood that was predominantly Black and had many neighbors who were Black, except for students. So it was students from the school and Black people. They were very poor. It was very clear. For instance, in those days, this was in the 60s, late 60s, 25% of the men were unemployed. That was the unemployment rate. And it was only like, 5 or 6% for white people. Now, I didn't know that, but I observed it. I observed, I heard mothers say, people say this now like they just found it out, white people, obviously not Black people. But here it was in 1967, and I'm hearing the Black mothers say they're afraid every single time their son walks out the door that he's not going to come back alive. Now, the police in Providence were incredibly corrupt. They were run by the mafia, which I found out when I did my practice teaching my senior year there. And they used to, and it was on the Italian neighborhood, and half my kids were in the mafia and families, and the police let heroin be sold in front of the school, and we had people die, kids dying in the school. It was just that corrupt. It was before, the mayor who was in the mafia went to jail, that kind of stuff. So we understood as students that no matter what happened around you, because of course there was crime, there was violence, it did, no matter where you are, that you did not call the police because they would beat up any Black person or any student. And it wasn't brown students, it was RISD students, because we were kind of hippies, right? I mean, we looked like hippies because it was the 60s and we were art school. So we all knew to stay away from the police. So anyway, so there was that I was learning about living in this neighborhood. Now, my first year there, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And the whole neighborhood, of course, came out. Now, they were totally nonviolent, but people were so heartbroken. So that um, that was a life-changing experience, to be surrounded by heartbroken people. Now, ever since I was in junior high and had some small exposure to civil rights, knew kind of intellectually what was going on, but not in the heart like that. I was told that it had already been done. And the worst thing that was ever said to me, and I got to tell you this because it still breaks my heart, and I've tried to even work it out with the person who said this to me 40 years ago, but I made this piece that was kind of hermaphrodite. I didn't know about transgender, but it just turned out to be this sculpture, and this was this very powerful kind of male female thing, creature. And this woman, and the teacher wouldn't, my teacher was so upset by it, it was my senior year, he wouldn't come in the studio. And so he just kind of like wouldn't come into my studio. I mean, this, it was school. So he sent in the only, and it was very sexist then too, at the school. No, women weren't allowed to do sculpture. So that's why I was in ceramics, even though I was doing sculpture. And this, but they finally got one woman to be a TA. She was a grad student. She was the only woman there. I can't imagine how hard it must have been for her. She probably hadn't a clue what was going on. But they sent her in to talk to me because, she's a woman. Gail will listen to her. This is before I even knew about feminism. So I was so out of it. So take my word for it, really out of it. So she comes in and she says, this has already been done, Gail. And I said, well, what do you mean? She says, well, she was from Wales. And she said, well, I studied in Paris. And at the Museum of Natural History there, they have a stuffed woman, the Hottentot Venus. This was a literal African woman from South Africa that was stuffed like an animal. And she didn't, I just went, what's that? And she goes, oh, it was a stuffed lady from Africa. I was like shocked. I was so shocked. I don't think I heard another thing she said. But she's telling me it's already been done. It's so hard to get across how stupid we were, how we knew nothing, and how it was like, what's going on? I don't get this. Protected from it.
Gail, I don't think that things have changed that much. There's still so many people who know absolutely nothing, and there's so many people who are resistant to learning.
When I was in art school, and you might have experienced this too when you were studying writing, you're supposed to draw on the culture. You're supposed to be building on it. So what happened is how I analyze it now, is if you were drawing upon and building upon the artistic conversation of the Western world, no one ever said it's already been done. They said, oh, these are your antecedents. These are what you're drawing on, and that was good. But if you are drawing on a different culture than Western culture, then it's already been done. It was the whole politics of primitive art, for instance, is lesser than fine arts. And fine arts was just art that some rich white guy wanted to buy. It was very based since the Renaissance on what rich people wanted to buy. So you can trace it right back. So, like when I was in ceramics, craft was less than fine art. So you could be making, people right from day one were making fabulous stuff. All of art is a craft, but that's not how we were taught. So that just left out everybody in the world except for a few European painters and sculptors. It was all done to dismiss, I believe, most of the creativity in the world, so that you had the scarcity of just a few things to pay a lot of money for. I mean, it kind of came out of the Renaissance and the rise of capitalism, banking, and then capitalism. I mean, I've read a lot about it because it really drove me crazy. And then, for instance, all right, so you got Picasso, Braque. They saw the African work at the same Museum of Natural History in Africa. They drew on that art. Oh, that was brilliant. They brought that art into the Western world and even actually started calling it art, but that was because they were European. And then some rich people started buying some of it, but it was only the three things that Picasso painted just because he was a Spanish white guy. So I'm just saying, you can just see it through. So you are in a proud tradition. You were dismissed because of a tradition of capitalism that's gone back to racism. I've gone back to the Renaissance.
Wow. Wow, I never thought of it that way.
You got to fight it, Will.
You mentioned being surrounded by heartbroken people after the assassination of Martin Luther King. And you mentioned that as like a turning point for you. Well, this is kind of a lot of what we talk about during our open discussion, racism discussion group that I mentioned in the intro. When we go around and we have round robin discussion on race, and we've talked a lot about empathy, and we've talked a lot about building connection between people of different cultures and races. And a lot of people who come to the group, a lot of white people specifically who come to the group, they have some moment like this. They have something that happened that made them realize that other people's humanity was being denied, was being suppressed, was being ignored, that their dignity was being just trampled on. And they were in a moment where they recognized that. And it was somebody who they had built a relationship with or built community with. And that is when they were impacted enough to either investigate more, just like you were, or to start fighting against these forces that created that level of dehumanization. So I just found that story to be really, for you, I mean, what more pinnacle or like powerful moment could there be than you experiencing people's grief after MLK? For me, just watching videos, seeing people's grief was so impactful for me growing up as a child. So I can't even imagine what it was like living among people who were experiencing that grief.
Well, not only that, I grew up where we didn't express our grief. I want to know how to change the system. I've always wanted to know how to change it. I don't know why. If I'm going to do the work, I want to make the culture different. I don't want to just keep people. Well, it's important to keep people alive, but for me, that never felt like my fault. Felt like
I feel the exact same way, Gail.
Yeah. And what I found there, because it was another, living very segregated, as many places are, that the white people that in those days would get involved is because their children had married into other races. I'll tell you, intermarriage is really important in this changing dialogue over the years. When those grandparents found out that their grandchildren were not treated well in their suburb or small town, they got pissed. And they wanted to change it. They were the best workers on it.
Yeah, we were just talking about this very thing in our open discussion group. It came up because we were trying to talk about solutions, and I was like, the number one thing that seems to get people on a path toward, fighting for racial equity is having a black person marry into their family. It's like the number one thing. And so, or any person of color, but like, and it's exactly what you just said, right? And you see it reflected in politics as well. Like the thing that I see, the common refrain is people who are fighting against anti LGBTQ legislation, right? And then all of a sudden, their own child comes out as
Yeah.
being a lesbian or being gay, and then all of a sudden, like now I see, like what people have to go through, and suddenly their vote changes.
Well, I wanted to say, while I was in Minnesota, I also learned about the Native American population. The Twin Cities area was the big city where there were a lot of reservations and a big circle around it. So there were a lot of people there. And when I was doing the anti-violence work, it was a lot of it was through the St. Paul Council of Churches, and they had a Native American ministry because people would come in from the reservations and really not know how to survive in the city. And it was partly because they were very, very, very taken advantage of and abused very badly as they came in. So one day we're having a meeting about family violence and how to help support, like in those days, a minister might say to a woman, oh, well, you have to, Jesus suffered and you're suffering, so that's good. You got to stay with the guy who's beating you up, that kind of stuff. So a lot of what we were doing was educating clergy to learn how to minister appropriately to that. And anyway, so this whole group of Native Americans came in and they said, we're interrupting your meeting because you have to understand that you white people taught family violence to our people. And I had no idea about this, the schools where they took the kids and put them in and didn't allow them their culture and didn't allow them to teach their language. And then we had opportunities to talk to people in some of the reservations and hear more of those stories. So it was in those days, and I don't know if Ben talked about it, but he was very shocked. He was in junior high then to find out, and it was just part of the history they were taught about Minnesota, about how the government just lied and lied and lied. They make a treaty, then they break it, make a treaty, break it. I mean, it was like every 6 months, and you could still see it happening in the State House. So not only was I starting to understand how racism worked in a day-to-day way, and starting to see how some people were able to resist that and try to make some changes. I also was learning that the indigenous people in this country had lived under a genocide nation. So, and that was just as very different, but just as oppressive as slavery and then the racism sense. So that was very important for me in terms of understanding the complexity of our national racism.
Well said.
Because the people there, they were very, the things the everyday person would say about an Indian were just as ignorant and awful, just nasty, hateful, as you hear people say about Black people. Both from the same European attitudes of dehumanizing everyone of color. They dehumanized, and then each immigrant group came and they had to prove that they were white. So it's like our whole nation, it's heartbreaking. Our whole nation is built on that dynamic, and it definitely, the people from my family that were here early were shaped by it right from the start. It's a lot to unpack.
It is. It's not easy, and we can see that it's not easy for people. People are scared to
Yeah.
confront that reality.
Why do some of us find this an adventure to unpack this? And some people sit in the anxiety. And I know for me, it's because my life has only gotten better as I understand it, and in terms of not better in some exterior way, although that too, I'm sure, but better in terms of just being happy. I, I was miserable not understanding any of this. I was unhappy. I didn't understand how the world worked. I
I
didn't
mean,
understand why I didn't understand my feelings. I didn't understand what they were. I didn't understand. I couldn't make sense of it. And I like better understanding my feelings and understanding the world around me. It makes me feel more at home in the world.
the image that I was kind of thinking about while you were saying that is being burned by an invisible flame, right?
Mm,
Like when you're
mm,
ignorant, that is the experience that you can have. It's like things are happening to you and around you, and you don't have the framework with which to make sense of it all. And
that's a great
it's just
image.
painful.
Yeah,
How can
it's
you be happy
painful.
when you know that people are suffering all around you and you don't even understand why, you know?
Yeah, and I suffered because of it. I mean, I suffered from oppression. I suffered um, in my own way, not as badly as other people. I get that, but enough to have the empathy. I suffered enough from it to have empathy. When you really have empathy, it's not, oh, this is my feeling, and therefore this person must have feelings like me. Real empathy is going outside of yourself and really trying to feel from the heart of the other person and see the world, really see the world as they feel it, not just experience it, sense it. So that's empathy, and I thought they put it better than I was grateful to them.
Awesome. Awesome.
So it's like the first week I'm in Nashville. Number one, I cut. All right, so I'm at the church. They say they're going to have a big separation of church and state rally, and it's at the biggest. It was a Black Pentecostal church, 10,000 members in Nashville. And Gail, could you go speak at it? Oh yeah, I'm all about separation church. I can talk about that. So number one, I had no idea what I was getting into, or what their culture was. So when I moved to the South, like it's August, it's 100 degrees. I don't have any clothes, professional clothes of any kind, anything that's not a bathing suit, that you can go in public and be a professional in not in 100 degrees. So I actually had to put a robe on, my church robe, right? Because I had to have something that fought in the Black church. In these churches, anyway, no robes. Nobody wears robes. So I got up there, I've got a robe on. I'm a woman. They don't have any Black women ministers in this church. And I get up there and I said something about being a damned Yankee. And so all I know is for the next 6 months, there's all these rumors going around that this new minister who came to town, just no Black church is ever going to have her near them ever again. But nobody would tell me why. Nobody would tell me directly. It was all, third, fourth person. Finally, somebody would tell me that it was because I had said damn in the pulpit. And I said, well, they were preaching hellfire and brimstone. The other ministers talking about hell and damnation. I said, yeah, but you made a joke about it and you're a woman and you weren't, the minister's wife dressed in white, white. And I just didn't know anything about Now, I might have decided to do all those things, but anyway, what I learned was it really was a whole different culture, and it took me, I would say, for next 5 years, I went to everything, but I just watched. I just kept my mouth shut and I watched because then I found out we had like a partnership with one Black church that was very weird in terms of the relationship of how the minister thought about us and vice versa. He very ambivalent about a woman minister, and it went pretty well because our choirs like to do stuff together. Matter of fact, they went to Black and White, two choirs together. They went down to Selma to one of the celebrations together and sang there. And I mean, and then people were just blown away. I mean, like the Black bus driver said he'd never seen Black and White people on one of his buses before, stuff like that. So it was really powerful. But the women really liked having a woman minister. And I found out that was a really delicate thing in the Black church, that how any woman minister fit in that. And I ended up with some Black women minister friends who were really caught in that. Very difficult. But anyway, all I could say is I slowly learned, and then we had this community organizing. A lot of the African American, all the faith communities, very interracial, it was multi-faith, all these different faith communities, and it was what's the IAF? It's the one that Saul Alinsky started. But there was a lot of tension, and it was around the fact that the Black churches just didn't have as much money as the white churches, and the white churches could contribute more, and it became very tense. And we broke up. It fell apart because of it. But the Black church had a lot of political power because they really had a lot of members, and so there was a lot of tension. Anyway, so I watched that fall apart. And then people kind of explored and said, let's go with Gamaliel, which is the one that Obama worked for. It's just they're both out of Chicago. And so the Gamaliel came down, and they decided it would start with the Black church, and they would build their power base. And then when they invited people in, we came in. So it was their power base. And again, it's like being an ally. What does it mean to be an ally? What I found out and why I finally built trust, besides the fact that I'd shown up, we'd shown up for year after year. It takes time to build trust with, hundreds of years of distrust for good reason. So it was because I, being a Northerner, could keep the people from Chicago from just taking over. In other words, a guy would come down from Chicago and blah, 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 and the old union organizer guys, they had very tough kind of, they're all like immigrants themselves, right? So they're tough. Anyway, and I would just say, all right, it's time for you to shut up. And it's time for you to listen to the people at the table. You. Now, because I know you want to talk, so please talk. And then it would be good. So it turned out that that's how I built trust.
So you were playing a kind of a mediator type role, huh?
Yeah, I guess. I was just not afraid to. My culture came in handy.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So what am I proud of? It's not like you can say, all right, so you can say the work kept happening, the consciousness kept getting raised. Maybe there were 2 steps forward and only 1 step back, maybe not. At least it didn't go too far back. The work in the church, my church, which was mostly white, I could see there was progress. People really worked on their white agenda. And because we're doing this together, we have to change. They had been very active in the civil rights movement in the 60s, and they had been kind of resting on their laurels on that for a long time. And at first, I didn't get how important it was, but a bunch of people at church, they started studying that White Fragility by Robin,
D'Angelo.
yeah, D'Angelo. Oh my God, I thought they were going to die. But it did more. The ones that stuck with it did more. And then they started doing this thing every year where people, it was a whole thing that some of the other Southern white churches were doing. And it was just really good. It was like a way to learn like how to interfere with people just saying racist things, or, getting the courage to speak up, and, just in your day-to-day relationships. And that really, really helped transform them, because they started to feel like I'm learning to see myself in this, but I'm also feeling a little empowered to help out. And they do role playing and actually practice. And then at the end, it was like a pledge. They'd make it. It was based on the Birmingham pledge. After the stuff, they have a big pledge about everybody in town would make a pledge of what they're going to do to help end racism, and it's up all over the place in Birmingham. So that, so we had the Nashville pledge, but what it meant was everybody would write down what they pledged to do, and it could be anything from I'm going to speak up to this to I'm going to work on ending, the racism in the schools, which was a very specific thing, or it could be that big, or it could just be, I'm not going to let somebody say a racist thing at my work in front of anybody. So anyway, those are the kinds of things that I'm proud of helping. But it wasn't just me. I mean, people did this together. I mean, there was a lot of people who really worked hard on both the community organizing and the thing. And that was the other thing. I really learned that that you have to do this together.
Exactly. Yeah. But take your coins, Gail. All right.
Yeah. I grew up, with a very hierarchical idea of leadership, where, a lot of people supported the leader to be able to be the big man. But even my mom, who brought up 7 children, I don't even know how she did it, she was like, she did the same kind of leadership. It was very much the captain of the army, and which is, it worked. But I mean, it was, you were obedient, so there's a whole top down, and the followers are obedient to the leader who is always right.
So like a domineering type of style.
Very domineering, kind of controlling. A lot about control, which I do think is a part of the white culture too. It's like, if you're not in control, you're bad, which is, really pathetic, because we're hardly ever in control, So, but there's this thing. Okay, so when I became a minister, that was the image of leadership I had, but I knew that's not what I wanted. I had worked in enough things. I was 40 by the time I was a minister, so I had worked in enough things to know. I mean, I've been in a cooperative gallery where, 10 of us really ran things cooperatively by consensus. I worked in places very top down. I've worked in very organizations that were pure anarchy, and saw that didn't work very well. So I knew I didn't want top down, but I really didn't know any other way to be. But being controlling didn't work very well. In my first church, my sister was dying. My baby sister. And I was a wreck, no emotional intelligence. So I didn't know how to deal with this at all. Here I am, the pastor for other people. I was a good listener. That was good work. But I have no wisdom for anybody. I and I remember I was with my committee on ministry, and there was a man, and I said, I don't know what's wrong. I can't do pastoral care. I go, and I'm not really fully present. I'm really treading water with it. And there's this young man whose whole career had been helping developmentally disabled adults. And he just looked at me. And he said, Gail, why do you think you have to do your best all the time? You know, just doing it half-assed, that's what it means to be a pro. You're just getting by, but you're getting by. It's okay. I thought, what are you talking about? I mean, that was like, bing, bing.